Hello everybody, we are here today outside of Dayton, Ohio because we are at the Wright Patterson Air Force Base, the museum at the Air Force Base, the U.S. Air Force Museum. And it is awesome here. I will be honest, it is amazing. We have been to museums all over the country. We've been to the Smithsonian's in Washington, D.C., the National Air and Space Museum, everything. They do not hold a candle to this place. And you would think it's kind of weird. You're like, Dayton, Ohio. I promise you, it is awesome. Well, we made it into the first hangar here where all the airplanes and stuff are. We had to go through a little bit of a security. There's a weird new side entrance instead of the main entrance, which is kind of odd. But we're in. We are in. And this is, I'm guessing this is going to be through the generations here. So this looks like some old busted flying contraption. The 1909 military flyer, which is the first military aircraft ever used, and it was used for 2 years in the Army. Although I think it just basically crashed and really didn't do much, so they eventually got rid of it and retired it. Yeah, I don't know that this thing looks like a super dangerous military aircraft, I'm going to be honest. Everybody, meet the bug. This was an aerial torpedo. Designed and created. It had a little machine in it. You launched it, sent it over, the wings would detach, the engine would cut off, and it would drop to the earth. It was never actually used in combat, however. And there was only about 50 of them made, but that's kind of cool, a little aerial torpedo. Check this thing out. This is the Martin MB-2. It's the first bomber produced by Americans. It has a wooden frame. But look at this thing, man. This thing is a monster. Huge. Pretty cool, actually. And it actually says it had a top speed of 99 miles an hour. 99 miles an hour? That was the fastest this plane could go? We have cars easily that go faster than that nowadays. It's just crazy to me. I can't imagine getting in this thing made of wood. I mean, there's metal parts, but it's got a frame of wood. Wow. That's crazy. It's pretty cool looking, though. Check out this old Ford Model T ambulance. These were used during World War I. It's kind of neat. They had a lot of cool stuff in here. So this whole section that I'm in right now, I think was sort of like the beginning early stages of flight. You got some of the Wright brothers flyers over there. And this is sort of the very beginnings of military aircraft into World War I aircraft. So there's a lot of neat stuff in here. It's just crazy to see how quickly these things evolved, too. Because you sort of have these like paper, wooden wing aircraft, and then when you get kind of over into this section, I mean, years have gone by, but there's all these like metal aircraft that look so much more modern, just really quickly. There's some really cool like aircraft in here, and as we're kind of walking along them, I'm like, I wonder if they're going to have like a P-52 in here. Like, I really want to see a P-52. which was used heavily in the early wars, and that's just kind of like an iconic plane to me. And I'm like, okay, I want to keep walking and see if I can see one. I'm gonna bet they have one in here, but that was like a cool That was a cool aircraft. That was like the aircraft that the servicemen and women, like when they saw that thing like flying over their skies, like they were like P-52s, yes, yes, like they were like almost like they were saved. They had all that support. I'm not very good about my history though, to be honest. I don't know if that was a World War I plane or World War II. I feel like it was a World War II plane, so I don't think we've gotten to World War II yet. But maybe the early versions of P-52s are here. I feel like that's what some of those are back there. Check out this bad boy. This is the B-10. And you can kind of see, I think a lot of people think of like the B-52 bombers, the Memphis Belle. If you've ever seen that movie and that particular aircraft, they think of that, and you can look at these aircraft right here and see that they were the predecessors. I mean, you can already see some of the features of it that are very similar. You can just see how they evolved. But this was the first all-metal bomber produced. Remember the last one I showed had a wooden frame. And this one's actually the first all-metal, so that's pretty neat. There's so many cool planes in here. I could literally spend like 5 episodes just in this one room. That is actually a German flyer right there. After World War I came to a conclusion, there were all these strict limitations put on Germany as far as what kind of aircraft they were allowed to produce. And so instead they actually produced all these flyers, like these little gliders, to continue to study like aerodynamics and improve their flight programs and things like that in order to get around all the stipulations, because they weren't allowed to basically build certain types of aircraft after the First War. It's crazy. That is a cool aircraft, the Northrop A-17. That's neat. This aircraft right behind me, you can see it's face first in the ditch. It said this is an illustration of what would happen if there was too much wind on the tail during cadet flight training and things like that. There would be all these mishaps. And this was kind of one of the things that could happen. If you had too much tailwind, it would go face down. But it said 40% of all cadets in the flight schools at that point in time did not graduate. It's a pretty high number. This is the famous Hawker Hurricane Mark II, built and used by the British. It's a pretty cool airplane. That nose design, I feel like, is very iconic, especially a British aircraft. It's pretty cool. British female pilots led the way, or lead the way. I don't know what you say there. A few iconic women here. Mary Wilkins Ellis. It's also got Jacqueline Cochran. It says Ellis initially flew the Tiger Moth, but during the course of the war she flew 76 types of aircraft. Right here between two of the hangars it says this is the, I don't know how to pronounce that, RB, I'm not going to try and pronounce it, you can read it. But this is a Holocaust exhibit. It's called Prejudice and Memory. It says that it's comprised of photographs and artifacts and memories of people who now live in Dayton, Ohio, which is where we're at right now. Among the contributions are concentration camp survivors and their families, liberators and righteous Gentiles. So I'm walking by this photograph and it has this name right here. That's the name, that archway when we walked in, that's what it said on there. And apparently that is a concentration camp, the name of a concentration camp. So when we walked into that archway, that, I guess, is what it was meant to be. This is unreal right here. It says this is probably the rarest artifact in this entire exhibit, and it's an actual concentration camp uniform. It says it's one of the very few still in existence. Oh, that's crazy. That's very sad. They have some interesting bomber jackets and things in here in this display that show. A lot of them have like a record of all of their missions and things on them. Here we have the P-40 Warhawk. Again, an early predecessor to the P-52 that I've been looking for. That's a cool aircraft there. And then over here we have the B-25 bomber. Very Memphis Belle looking. They have a really awesome exhibit here about WASP. As you can see, WASP breaking ground for today's female U.S. Air Force pilots. And it's all about this division called WASP that was created and the different aircraft and thing that they flew. And it says WASP pilots were an important element in the movement of women into war work to free men for combat and other duties. Here's another awesome display about the Tuskegee Airmen. There was actually a movie produced about the Tuskegee Airmen, and it says Legacy of Equality. The Tuskegee Airmen proved themselves equal to any other flyers and support troops, but black airmen remain segregated after the war. However, they had made it obvious to many leaders, including President Harry Truman, that segregation in the military was morally wrong, inefficient, and should be ended, stating that the highest standards of democracy were essential in the armed services. President Truman's Executive Order 9981 said there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. Congressional Gold Medal for the Tuskegee Airmen. So there's a lot of really cool things. There's more information back here about it. There's a whole display about it. Here's another British aircraft. You can tell by the distinct nose on the front. And this is the Spitfire Mark 5C. That's the Spitfire. That's probably one of the more popular, well-known British aircraft in the war. We are making our way around the World War II on the search for the P-51 Mustang. We actually walked through here already once, and we missed it somehow, and I was like, I have to go see that. So now we're going to go through it a second time and see if we can find it. Ah, there we found it. This was the hero fighter during World War II. See right there, P-51 Mustang. It's one of the most well-known fighters used in the U.S. Army during World War II. Operated primarily as a long-range escort fighter and also as a ground attack fighter bomber. Served in nearly every combat zone during World War II and even fought in the Korean War. That is a cool airplane. And here we are. We finally made it over to the Memphis Belle. This is the B-17F Flying Fortress. Probably the most well-known aircraft in any war. There's an entire movie made about the Memphis Belle. This is probably one of the coolest bomber aircraft ever to be created, in my opinion. It's got forward and aft machine gun turrets. It's got top side and bottom side machine gun turrets. There's the little ball down there, which I'll kind of go over and show. That ball was actually kind of turned into a death trap for a lot of people, especially if they had to do belly landings because they couldn't get out of the ball many times. But it is an awesome piece of machinery. Here's the underside machine gun ball here. You can see the actual machine gun.
Because guess where you were going?
On the outside there. But look at how small this is, and the lack of ability to move around in there, and actually even get out. Now they did in earlier versions. There was no way to get out. You had to enter and exit from outside the plane. So if they had to belly land, there was no way to get out, and this person would definitely not survive. In later versions, they actually did create an exit from the inside, but it only was accessible depending on how the ball was rotated. And so if the ball jammed and they couldn't do anything, they couldn't get out, it was still, again, very dangerous. And these things did jam. So I just can't imagine. You had to be very small to actually sit in that little ball turret there and operate it. I actually found an image of the person being cramped up in that ball there. Look how they had to sit. I mean, it was rough. That was a rough spot. Oh, they got some payloads in this B-17 here. That's pretty interesting. I mean, I'm going to assume these are non-active, but still interesting. Kind of see how this worked. When I see the things like that turret there, to me, it just is crazy because the amount of courage. I just think of all the people that were in these wars back in the day, all the courage, all the things that they had to go through. It was really amazing. Now these were the 88mm flak cannons that Germany used to shoot down the flying fortresses. There were literally tons and tons of these all littered throughout Germany, and they would fire flak up to rip through and shred those bombers, in addition to the fact that those bombers had to fend off from actual fighter aircraft as well. Now, they usually did have fighter support up to a certain point until they would cross over. I don't know what the threshold was. I don't know if it was a specific battle line or whatnot, and then they would have no support all the way into their bombing target, and they had to survive attacks from fighters. They had to survive attacks from flak cannons, which is why you can see there was so many external machine gun ports to try to defend themselves. Now, I do want to point out that that is the actual Memphis Belle.
That's so cool.
That is the original Memphis Belle flying fortress that is in them, that they talk about in the movies all throughout history. That's the one. And that's the thing about the Memphis Belle, is the reason it was so famous is because it survived so many missions. When most of the airmen, most of the actual planes that went didn't come back. And the ones that did, maybe they came back once, maybe they came back twice, but they certainly didn't make it through a lot of different missions. So that's the big story about that. If you've never seen the movie Memphis Belle, it's a phenomenal movie. A story of courage, and it's just amazing. That's the original. That's the one. Right behind me here is the Messerschmitt 262A. It is the first jet plane, this first jet fighter ever used in war, in war times, and it is a German plane. And when they introduced this thing, it incurred obviously serious casualties against the American and British forces because this was a vastly superior aircraft. And here we have probably the most famous or infamous, depending on what you want to say, fighter from the Japanese Army in the war. This is the Japanese Zero. A couple interesting helicopters up there. I mean, there's just so many planes. This is literally the first hangar. We haven't even gotten out of the first hangar yet. Now it says that these boxcars were used by Germany here to transport goods, weapons, and things like that, but these were also used to transport prisoners to the Holocaust camps. If you've ever seen the movie Pearl Harbor, you will know a little bit about the Doolittle raid, which was our first attempt to strike back after Pearl Harbor. And this was the aircraft that was flown during the Doolittle raids that they had to take off of the Navy aircraft carriers. And right here, see B-25B bomber. This was the type that was used during the Doolittle raids. I should say the Doolittle raid because it was one raid. If you don't know much about the Doolittle raid, it largely was considered to be successful. Now, don't get me wrong, it didn't really do a whole lot as far as damage goes in Japan, but it was a moral victory for the United States after Pearl Harbor that we could strike so deeply into the heart of Japan. And then you know the story that followed, which is we eventually delivered the bomb. That was sort of like the deciding factor in wrapping up the war. Right here we have the Bockscar, and that is actually the nuclear weapon right there, replica of what it looked like. This is the ship. This is the actual aircraft that dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki. This is the bomb that ended the war. Hiroshima was first, which was dropped by the Enola Gay, which actually used to be in this museum, I believe, if I remember correctly. It's been moved since then. It's in the National Museum now, but this is the one that technically ended the war. When this bomb dropped on Nagasaki after Hiroshima, that was it. Right there, you can see the logo on the side of it. It also says Nagasaki. We just finished up the World War II hangar and the World War I and early flight hangar, and I think we're going to head now to the Korea Cold War and towards the presidential hangar and the space hangar as well. All right, it says to the left is Southeast Asia, Vietnam, and to the right is Korea. So, man, it is big in here. Whew. I mean, it's got to be, I guess, because it's got to hold all these giant airplanes. Ooh, we can go inside this airplane. That looks pretty cool. Let's check this one out. Ah, look at those fighter jets over there. They also have some like virtual reality or simulator rides and stuff. That's pretty cool. It says that this is the C-124 Globemaster II. Man, this thing's huge. And it's pretty cool that we can actually go in this, I gotta say. Wow. So what did it say? It say this is a cargo or transport ship or troop transport?
That's always, sometimes it's like a people
Huh.
thing, you know?
I don't know what this is. I guess an engine? It says bunks for off-duty crew members are up there. Right here we have a B-29 bomber fuselage that it looks like we can go in. Compared to that last ship, this one's so tiny, like I'm literally having to crawl inside here. Like I'm literally ducking to get in here. This is pretty neat though, I'm gonna be honest. Like here's the co-pilot's chair. You got the pilot's chair seat over here. Look at those controls. What else do we have in here? Engine controls. This is pretty neat. It says crew tunnel. I don't know, I guess you needed to crawl through here for some reason. And this is the bomber stuff in here. So I have to duck to get through here. And this is actually more space than there was in the last area that I was in. But this is pretty neat. Wow, I didn't realize that these aircraft, oh, I can finally stand up. Where these aircraft, these bombers and stuff were so small like this. As far as like having space to move around in. It's crazy. Now we're starting to get into some modern technology here. Check out this F-22 Raptor. Like this, for some reason, to me, this is the aircraft that I think of when I think of the movie Top Gun. Like, I'm pretty sure this is not the aircraft they used in Top Gun. This is probably a much older model than what was used in that movie, but it looks very similar to those aircraft. That is a cool jet. Just kind of want to scan all these aircraft that were going by. We just don't have time to cover every single one. There's so many cool aircraft in here. What do you think so far?
It's awesome. There's so many planes. Like, they just keep going and going and going.
Crazy.
And going.
and every single one, like there's like 100 plaques to read.
Yeah.
Because it'll tell you about like the engine for the aircraft. It'll tell you like what missions the aircraft, who flew the aircraft, when it was created, the name of it, the information, where it was used, human stories about people who lived or died and all these things. Like, it's like crazy.
You can't read them all. You
No.
have to just...
We just have to keep going, and there's even like, and then there's tons of plaques and things that have nothing to do with the aircraft. There would be like uniforms of people that were in the wars or pilots and things. Like, man, there's so much. I mean, literally, we could spend days in here. It's insane to me. I'm trying to kind of pull out the coolest ones, like the ones that I've always sort of like grown up with or thought about. We are currently right directly underneath the B-52 bomber. And this is the bomb bay here, where you can see where all the bombs would have been and then they would have been dropped from. This is pretty cool. I want to get an outside shot of this thing. I want to get a shot of some of these bombs here that are actually held on the wings of the B-52. I mean, this thing was a mega fortress. I think they called it a I forget. I'll look for it. but this was a massive bomber. I mean, this is so much different. You think about the early flying fortresses that we showed Memphis Belle. I mean, they were, I don't know, like size-wise, I feel like they were like a quarter of the size of this beast. This thing is massive. Takes up almost like this. It spans the entire hangar. It's so wide that wing to wing, tip to tip, it will not fit in this hangar, which is why it's angled diagonally. Because if it was literally straight on this hangar, it would be too wide. Crazy how big that thing is. We have now gotten to the part where we will get to see the Berlin Wall. All this information about the Berlin Wall. You can see sort of this like Berlin Wall replica here. Right behind me is a recreation of a section of the Berlin Wall. When we were walking through that tunnel and I said, look, this is where we're going to see Berlin, this section actually used to be back there. So I was so confused when I didn't see the Berlin Wall. But that's it right behind me. And they actually do have an authentic piece of the Berlin Wall that I'll show you. It's pretty interesting. And here's that piece I was talking about. From a section of the wall located between Potsdamer Strasse and Checkpoint Charlie in the city of West Berlin. I'll confess, when I walked over here, I was confused as to why there were cars inside of the Air Force hangar at the Air Force Museum. And then I read this. This is a Vapor Special Operations Supercar that they basically built as sort of a recruiting tool, if you will, to show the ingenuity of the engineers in the Air Force that create things. This is obviously a Dodge Challenger. This is actually the car that I have. I have this actual car. Mine is not quite so cool, I'll be honest. But it is pretty neat in here. I don't know what all these little gadgets and things are, and I don't know why there's a steering wheel on both sides. But it's got like nitrous in the back. I don't know how it's propelled, but it's pretty neat. But I'm going to say this is a little bit more expensive and nicer than my Challenger. Does it feel the same as ours?
No.
No?
Not at all.
It looks like we can actually go in here and check out the cockpit. This is an F-86D Sabre aircraft. It looks like we can go and check that one out down there too. I want to take a look. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely not a lot of room in there, I'll tell you what. So we're about to go up and take a look at the cockpit of the Starfire, which they're telling us only shot rockets. It had no guns on it whatsoever, so it only shot, I don't know, rockets, missiles. I don't know what the difference between a rocket and a missile is, I'll be honest. But basically rockets. And it says it holds 48 rockets between the rockets on the wings and in the nose cone here, which I'll show. Let me take a look at it. But we're going to go take a look at the cockpit. It's kind of cool. So these doors actually extend out when they need to fire the rockets and then close back up when it's done. He said to keep it aerodynamic when it's flying. And then it looks like there's also some rockets in the wings over there. So 48 rockets altogether, I think. No guns, though. That's crazy. I mean, I guess you don't need guns when you got 48 rockets. And here's the cockpit. So it looks like it was a two-seater, the Starfire. Man, that's pretty cool. All right, so I did ask the guy, I said, what's the difference between a rocket and a missile? He said basically rockets, he said missiles are a bit bigger, and they're usually radar guided. Like they kind of home in on their, or they follow or go towards whatever you're trying to shoot at. He said rockets are just kind of like hope for the best, like point and shoot. And he said usually they would shoot like maybe 10 or 12 of them at one time. Then they would kind of scatter. Some of them would like shoot, like go and fizzle off and hit nothing. Some of them, but basically almost like a shotgun, like shoot a shotgun of rockets towards something and hope for the best. Doesn't seem like the most efficient, I'll be honest, warcraft. And still weird to me that no guns to kind of defend yourself. I feel like you'd burn out those 48 rockets pretty quickly and then you'd be defenseless. But especially if you're shooting 12 at a time and hoping for the best. But I don't know. Maybe that's why they didn't use that much. Right here in front of me, we have the Mark VI nuclear bomb. That is literally a nuke right there. Obviously, doesn't have any power, you know, because what's actually the nuclear part of it is on the inside, but that's an actual nuclear bomb there. Just, well, I should say the casing for a nuclear bomb, so technically not a nuclear bomb, but that's what it is. Pretty interesting. It's pretty big. Moog, stand over by that. I want to get like a scale of how big this thing is. Look how big that's one bomb. That thing's humongous. Still, though, to think that even, it seems humongous, but like the actual amount of damage it does is crazy compared to the size of it. Hopefully we never have to ever see a nuclear bomb get used ever in the rest of history. This is a little model replica of like a refueling. You can see I believe that's a Blackbird. Is that what that's called? It's hard to see on the camera for some reason. But they could basically refuel mid-air. And that's what this aircraft here was designed to do. And you can actually see over here on the end the refueling rod that would swing down. So that's pretty cool. I didn't know that the refueling rod had these windows right here where they could actually see, you know, the aircraft approaching. I'm guessing try to put it in a position, which I guess makes sense. It's probably all done automated nowadays with computers and everything, but I guess back then, in order to refuel, they needed they needed sight. Right here is the Boston camera that was actually mounted in these giant aircraft. I mean, that's a big camera. Man, that's big. It said this is the biggest camera ever built. The largest aerial camera ever built. Said it can detect a golf ball on the ground from 45,000 feet high. Huh. We're going to check out the Hanoi Taxi. It says the Hanoi Taxi flew 2 missions into Hanoi, carrying out 78 POWs, 2 civilian returnees to Philippines. So it became a symbol of freedom. Let's go in here and check it out. You can see all the places they would have sat here, I guess. I'm going to assume there were seats right here, maybe. I don't know. All the writing? First 40.
Wars were released, and that's just the thing I brought them home from
Yeah.
North Vietnam.
The first 40 POW plaque. Looks like all those little autographs and signatures and plaque names. All those autographs on that door. The gentleman sitting there in the chair right behind me was actually a navigator and a bombardier that flew these. You can actually meet him. You can talk to him, learn a little bit about it, take pictures. It's pretty neat. So there you have it. What a great time we had today here at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Museum. Did you have fun?
Yeah.
I had a blast.
This place is enormous.
This place is
I had
enormous.
to stop and get a snack twice.
Twice. She did. I didn't, but she did. It is so big, in fact, that we're actually going to break this episode into 2 parts because it's just too much content. So stay tuned tomorrow. We will post the next half of this video. You're not going to want to miss it because we are going to be going through all of the Cold War, all of the space museum stuff, and even some of the stuff right behind me here, which you can see a space shuttle and the presidential hangar that's coming up, Air Force One, a lot of stuff to come. So be sure to tune in tomorrow to see the rest of the show. But until then, thanks for joining us. The Noble Way.
Is the easy way.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.